So, good morning, Paul. Paul Mahoney from Nova Services. So, Nova is more than just property lending. So, for the listeners who are coming to this call, Nova, and you can explain it much better, Paul, than I can. Nova covers the wide spectrum of property. So, fantastic for an armchair investor who's looking for a helping hand, but it's also a service for more experienced investors who are more hands-on, who just want lending. Now, I've explained it that particular way, Paul, but I'm sure you can explain it a lot more in depth than I can.
Nova Financial, we pretty much advise on all aspects of property investment. You're right, for those that are looking to be more passive, we can guide them through the whole process and make it all very easy. It's very much an end-to-end advisory service. And for those that are a bit more hands-on, then it's more of a support service. So we can do the finance, we can do management, we do insurance, pretty well all of the services that property investors need, we can provide.
Sure. And Paul, your background's Australian, of course, and you've had an IPO in Australia in your previous business.
Yeah, so I previously ran a company called Spring Financial Group, which is a full-service financial planning company. However, we were very property-focused. We were one of the first financial planning companies to incorporate direct property investment as a key part of our clients' portfolios.
Sure. Have you been able to implement any of the Australian way of doing things to the UK in terms of property? Is there crossover? Is there things which the UK market?
The markets are very similar. You know, both the property markets, the finance markets, the people's attitudes in general are quite similar, and the culture is quite similar. So yeah, it's very transferable.
Sure. And Nova Financial Services, do you want to just explain how the team works and the company structure? So there's Nova, the umbrella, and then you've got different parts of Nova coming off it, from Nova Financial Services. And
yeah, well, look, essentially how it works is we meet with clients, get an understanding of their situation and put together a criteria from that. Obviously determine if there's a fit between the service that we provide and what they're looking for. If there is, then we go away and put together a recommendation which includes both property and finance. And assuming the client's happy with that, then we help them implement that recommendation, which is really based around how to improve their situation and what their next steps should be.
Paul, who's your ideal client? So do they have to have a certain sweet spot? Are they London focused or UK focused, Southeast?
It's fairly broad sweeping in that we deal with first-time investors through to high net worths, but most of our clients are what we call mum and dad investors. They're people who are looking to provide for retirement and have a preference for property as compared to other asset classes, and essentially are looking for some guidance on how best to go about that in a way that they can be confident that they're making the right sort of educated investment.
Sure. If someone hasn't got the perfect credit score as such, you still can help them out, though, as we were discussing before the...
So there are quite a few lenders in the market now that will deal with adverse credit. Obviously, the interest rates tend to be a little bit higher and there's a few more hoops to jump through. But look, there's a very broad spectrum of lenders out there. Obviously, you have High Street at one end, which are the cheapest, but usually the most difficult to deal with and the most stringent in their criteria. And then you have the guys at the other end of the spectrum who will almost lend to anyone, but tend to be quite expensive. And then there's everyone in between. So a lot of them have their own little niche at what they sort of tend to target, and there is a niche for adverse credit.
Sure. Okay, that's interesting. And in terms of, we're going to go into a little bit of detail about Brexit and post-Brexit and so forth. But how best to connect with you after this interview? Is there a website?
Yeah, our website is www.nova.financial. Our phone number is 0203 8600, or our email is info@nova.financial.
Thank you. So, of course, there's been changes post-Brexit in property finance. One of the biggest changes, but I'm sure you're going to go into other spectrums as well, is Aldermore pulling out of bridging. So, but that's just one facet of property finance, and it's probably a very small facet of property finance because bridging is still a very, very competitive industry. Auctions are not going away. Whether the demographics of auctions have changed in terms of numbers of lots being sold. But what
seem to be trying to move more mainstream.
Sorry, say that again.
Aldermore seem to be trying to move more mainstream, as opposed to specialising in things like bridging. They're looking to bring down their rates and I suppose compete with the not necessarily high street, but the sort of second tier lenders.
Sure. Okay. So that's just one facet. Of course, the drop of 0.25% as well, the Bank of England rate. What would you say are the key things for investors to take away from post-Brexit 23rd, 24th June so far? And I understand
you're quite right. We had the drop in the rates, and they've discussed dropping rates even further. Obviously, they can't go much further, or they completely lose control of monetary policy. But they could come down slightly further. Not all lenders have passed on that rate cut, but more lenders are expected to follow suit. Now, obviously, that reduces borrowing costs even further. We're in a situation now where you can get a 75% buy-to-let mortgage at 0.79%. So it's obviously never been that so cost-effective to borrow to invest in property. Whilst that's the case, when you can borrow at sub 2% and invest in properties that are yielding 7-8+%, it makes more and more sense to have some level of borrowings, or even a higher level of borrowings than perhaps you had before. Obviously, making sure you keep the flexibility to potentially pay down borrowings if you have to when rates go up. But the likelihood is, based upon historical trajectories of interest rates, is generally they will move in one direction and then they'll plateau for some time. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if rates don't go down any further, if they were to stay where they are now for probably 18 months, 2 years, and then potentially start to go up again. So we've got a bit of time in these very low interest rate environment.
Sure. So what key lessons would you say investors should be taking away? So let's say someone's keen to work with you. Have you noticed different strategies? Have you noticed more people flipping, more people holding, more people moving into development? What's your experience in the lending circle post-Brexit for yourself as a company?
Certainly a strong trend we've seen, which isn't necessarily lending specific, but is away from London and more toward the northern powerhouse cities. So places like Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool. I think I know that's both domestically and overseas, that people are starting to see London for what it is, a city that's done fantastically well capital growth-wise. We're now 65% beyond the 2007 peaks on average in London. So it's very easy to argue that London is kind of at the top of what's often referred to as the property cycle. So whether it be Brexit or tax change or whatever else, a slight pullback in prices in London probably shouldn't be that much of a surprise. But over long term, the fundamentals are solid and it will continue to do well. But certainly what we found is that a lot of focus has shifted toward places like Manchester and Liverpool, where for a third of the price you can be getting almost the same rent, because yields are sort of double or even more than double than London.
Just say that again, Paul, for the same.
So because if you're investing in London, average yields in London are about 3.5%, 3.5 to 4%. Whereas you look to Manchester, Liverpool, 7, 8, even over 8% is achievable. So if you're getting more than double the rent, more than double the yield, you can buy a property that's less than half the price and still be getting the same rent. So, for people that are cash flow focused, that makes an awful lot of sense. But, I think I know those cities have always been fairly good for cash flow, but what's interesting now is that there's just so many positive driving factors there. There's billions of pounds flowing into those cities on infrastructure spending. with things like HS2, HS3, other sort of city-specific infrastructure projects. There's over £12 billion of infrastructure projects going on in Liverpool at the moment, which will create thousands of jobs and will change that city significantly. So from a growth perspective, there's also a very strong argument that they'll do well as from a cash flow perspective, which obviously hasn't necessarily been the case in the past.
Sure, that's interesting to hear. Paul, I know you exhibit at the Landlord Investment Show. You have done. Are you planning to do that this coming?
Yeah, so we're at the Landlord and Letting Show the last 2 days. That was at the Barbican.
Wow. Okay.
We're doing another show this Saturday, which is called Shares Live. It is more of a shares-focused show, but we're obviously approaching it from a property perspective. Running a seminar there called Property versus Shares. And then in 2 weeks, we're doing the Landlord Investment Show in Birmingham. So we do about 2 or 3 shows a month, generally.
Okay, so it's not just the London shows then. So it's let's say the London listeners, or that's who I particularly attract because I'm based in London. Are you going to be at the Landlord Investment Show at Olympia? Is that
we
right?
will be. That's in November. There's also the Property Investor Show coming up in October. That's in a few weeks' time. That's probably the biggest one.
That's on October the 7th and the 8th. You're exhibiting or speaking at the...
Both. We're exhibiting and I'm speaking. So I say that's probably the biggest of the shows at the XL. So yeah, we'll be at both of those.
Sure. So I will definitely see you on October the 7th. Do you have a particular time slot you can give people for when you're speaking at October the 7th?
I don't think they've done the schedules as yet, to be honest. But we should find that out shortly.
Okay, so if people want to find out the
schedule, they can refer to the website and it should be up very shortly.
Sure. Okay, Paul, I just want to say huge thanks for your time. So there's great opportunities to hear Paul speak live. So you got the Property Investment Show, particularly if you're based in London. So Property Investment Show, which is on the weekend of 7th and 8th of October. And then are you speaking at the Landlord Investment Show as well? Yeah. I don't have the dates of that, but that is in November. So that takes place in the Olympics, run by Steve and Tracy Hanbury. So great opportunities to catch up with you, and also you can catch up with Nova via Facebook as well. So or direct through the website. So Paul, I just want to say huge thanks, particularly covering outside of London, which is interesting to hear. The opportunities for investors. So is there any other key things you want my listeners to take away from this particular interview this morning?
I suppose just touching on what you've just mentioned there, talking about outside of London, we find that most people tend to invest close to home because that's where they understand the market. But where we can add a lot of value is for those investors who already have their investors close to home to look a bit further afield. Because we have strong resources available to us, we can provide the information to people to enable them to become comfortable with an area they weren't familiar with recently. So if anyone is considering investing elsewhere, then please feel free to get in touch and we'd be happy to help with, I suppose, the education that's required to get you comfortable.
Sure. Are there any particular opportunities you're looking for, possibly to write in magazines or anything like that?
Well, I'm doing quite a lot of that at the moment, actually. I was on Property TV recently. I did another interview with them yesterday.
Wow.
I'm more than happy, always open to contributing to publications because it helps us get our message out there. So yeah, if anyone has any opportunities like that, then I'd be willing to discuss.
Brilliant, Paul. I'm just going to say thanks, and thanks to the listeners taking time out as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.